Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the RIBA. I'm Michael Morris. I'm the co-director of Artangel and a board member of the Longplayer Trust. Longplayer was commissioned by Artangel in the year 2000 to mark a new millennium. Conceived by the artist and musician Jem Finer, it's a piece of music set to play for 1,000 years, continuously and without repetition, and now under the stewardship of the Longplayer Trust. You can listen to Longplayer in the lighthouse at Trinity Buoy Wharf on the River Thames, or as a stream online. To mark Longplayer's 5th anniversary, supported by Arts Council England and our generous company of angels, Artangel initiated an annual event bringing together two leading cultural figures invited to think with one another in a public conversation. Like the music, the conversation is characterized by the long view, two people getting to know each other in real time, musing about future possibilities and concerns. The first of these conversations saw the artist Laurie Anderson partnered by the writer Doris Lessing in 2005. And in subsequent years, pairings have included George Soros and Alain de Botton, John Gray with James Lovelock, and last year, 2012, John Lanchester and Caitlin Moran. But back to tonight, and a kind of trick-or-treat edition of the Longplayer Conversation. Tonight's partners bring together an interest in the world outdoors and its resonance with our inner lives, and a spiritual life defined by faith but troubled by doubt. Richard Mabey is one of the great chroniclers of the natural world, the world of weeds and wild weather. He's the author of some 30 books, including the best-selling plant Bible, Flora Britannica, and Nature Cure, which describes how a renewed relationship with the natural environment helped lift the black clouds of a dark depression. Richard Holloway is a writer and broadcaster who was Bishop of Edinburgh and Primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church until he stood down in the year 2000. Trained for the priesthood in 1948, age 14, he attended an English monastery, Kelham Hall, the Society of the Sacred Mission, at the start of a remarkable journey beautifully charted in his poignant memoir, Leaving Alexandria, published last year. Richard Holloway has described himself as a post-religionist, whilst the Scotsman dubs him the bishop who stopped believing in God, but who hasn't lost faith in humanity. At Kelham Hall, Holloway recalls a 4-word mantra drilled into the novices by founding Father Herbert Kelly. Nothing counts but lifetimes. Nothing counts but lifetimes. A mantra that also drills down into the heart of Longplayer Project and serves as an apt introduction to both of tonight's Richards. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Holloway and Richard Mabey.
I get the first go, and I'd like Richard to launch out into deep water. It's fizzy water.
It's the life force.
Yes. I'd like you to tell us about Heinrich's ravens, their altruism, and then riff on the capacity for birds to do jazz and improvise and create new music. The underlying theme being that there is something intrinsically creative about the other creatures on this planet as well as us, in spite of what a lot of reductionism is claiming at the moment. And you, as both a scientist and a romantic, are in touch with both sides of that. So kind of launch us into that, because it's something that you speak very beautifully and trenchantly about.
Okay.
It's a small agenda.
Yes. Bernd Heinrich, it's as good a way to start as anyway, is a diligent, probably slightly insane North American ecologist, specializing in bird behavior. And he wrote a remarkable book about ravens about 10 years ago, which consisted of him basically living with ravens for several winters. He used to traipse up hills with what he called his raven bait, which could be anything from a dead goat, which he carried on his back, to several pounds of cat food. And he'd lay this out on the mountainside in the depth of winter and watch and listen. And he began to see remarkable behavior amongst the ravens, a very great deal of play. They were very fond of snowboarding, the ravens. If there was a good fall in the night, they'd do repeated toboggan runs down the slope. I think Bernd Heinrich joined in occasionally. This is the thing that people who work in these fields do, is they get in there with the animals. He was very mystified by the fact that there appeared to be altruism in these raven colonies, which seemed to him to buck the hard Darwinist equation of behavior is only there to promote your own genes. What appeared to happen was that if a decent carcass was found of a caribou or whatever it was, the ravens would gather on it, and they would start making really quite remarkable calls, which seemed to attract other ravens, not just their own kin, but an entire pack of them. And he spent his about 3 or 4 years trying to work out this equation using all kinds of complicated socio-biological models. He played some of their remarkable vocabulary of calls back to them, trundling along with dead goats and his tents, a multi-speaker sound system up to the top of this mountain and playing the raven songs back to them, trying to learn the intricate language by which they were building up this eating community on the carcasses. And he never actually reached a satisfactory conclusion, though the beauty of his observation is such that you know instinctively in your gut what is going on. That these birds are playing, to start with. He did find that most of them were youngsters, and enjoyed showing off by getting particularly choice bits of carcass and making a great deal of interesting noise about it. It was also quite canny. There was a possible biological explanation for some of it, a reductionist explanation, in that the younger ones were trying to call in the bigger ones to get a frozen carcass open, which they couldn't do with their own bills. What Bernd Heinrich painted in this book, almost against his better judgment, because he was a tough scientist and he didn't want any sense that these ravens were behaving outside an analyzable model. He painted a picture of a lively community of intelligent creatures sharing ideas and languages across the genetic boundaries and enjoying it while they did it. And there are still, I think, a very large number of scientists who won't go that extra mile and admit to wild creatures the status of what I would call agents in their own life. That is, they remain as subjects of the observer's life, and types of behavior which are mystifying, exciting, beautiful, have to be brought into the explanatory apparatus of the observer, which of course is built like a sentence. I am the subject, I am studying you, you are behaving as an object. And I suppose that much of my working life has been an attempt to follow that line from the old Cartesian model, which still dominates a lot of biological science of the organism as object, to trying to find out what an organism is if it is an agent. How do you begin to talk about it in those terms? Because as soon as you start to talk about it, it becomes another kind of object. And so you are locked in a kind of circle out of which you will never break, but the hard work of the writing and the thinking is to find a language which liberates the creature or organism or the plant from your language.
But say a wee bit about birdsong as well, because that too is subject to this same reductionist paradigm. And you have listened to one bird that actually got better at it and was actually doing a kind of Mahler's fifth by the end of summer. Tell us, go into that a little bit, because it's the creativity of animals, the fact that there is what you've already called some sense of agency in them. And why is it that we grudge them that? What is it in us? Is it a kind of fascist arrogance in our own rationality that grudges the other creatures that we share the planet with something of the same agency that we have?
Yeah, I think birdsong is really fascinating, not just intrinsically, and I'll just come round to that in a little while. I don't want to hog all this. The big poser is, why on earth do we like birdsong? I wouldn't for a moment argue with the fundamental explanation of birdsong, that it is a communication system between particularly male birds and their partners, expressing their sexual interests and affection for them, describing their area of territory, warning other male birds to keep their distance. And how sophisticated is that? You know, the idea that you defend a personal territory by singing rather than fighting. I mean, it's pretty cool, I think. But birdsong cannot be wholly explained by that, because it is far too complicated. If, as quite a lot of scientists do, and they're coming around to, I think, more and more of them, to the fact that there is more here than meets the ear, if you slow down birdsong, maybe 10 times to the speed at which birds may actually hear it, because their hearing is so much more acute than ours, their brains are capable of processing sound very much more quickly. You find not the simple musical lines that we would hear from a robin or a nightingale, but immense blocks of 20th century atonal music. Big chords are being sung simultaneously. Some birds, like the skylark, sing 200 notes in a second. It appears to us as one. And there is the most extraordinary amount of information, makes it sound too crude, but data of some sort that's being compressed in a bird song. And that really is peculiar. Why not, if you want to make a simple statement about territory and species and your affection for someone, why not just shout? Why all this falde-diddle? What does it mean? And there's no answer that I think we can find, except to acknowledge that it is happening, and that if you listen hard to a lot of birds, particularly nightingales, who have something like 200 different phrases in their repertoire, you are inclined to think this bird is actually improvising. Not totally, it never makes an entirely new noise, something, it doesn't suddenly sound like a bassoon. It's within the nightingale range, but it's always putting together astonishing new combinations. And it's intriguing to sort of try and think what's going on inside its consciousness at that point. Is it, the reductionist might say, on a kind of random selection, a shuffle system like you have on a CD player, where it's just repeating the notes, the phrases it knows at random? Or is it actually selecting them, and selecting them bizarrely in a way that sometimes sounds exceedingly affective as well as effective to us? The problem is keeping the otherness of the bird at the front of your mind here. However much we may empathize with this creativity, this is a bird with its own musical system. I heard Chris Packham on Springwatch this year. Knows a lot of stuff, Chris, but doesn't know where his limits are. And he said one night, the better the singer, the better the song, the fitter the bird. Well, I don't know if he meant fit in the way that a teenage girl would use it about a boy band now, or if he meant it in the old Darwinian sense of just being more likely to produce viable offspring. But what does he mean by a better song?
Yeah.
One that sounds better to a human being? No. Is he judging the bird's song by human musical standards? Because we all do. But that's sure not the way that the birds debate about the songs in their own communities. And I think the thing Richard was hinting at was I think there's only been one piece of research that I know that's been done trying to link the nature of song with breeding success. Chris Packham said, the better the song, and he presumably meant louder, more various, more variegated, the fitter the bird. One piece of research showed that the most expressive nightingales, the ones with the most astonishingly diverse ranges of phrases, the ones that went on singing for the longest, the ones that had failed to find a mate. So, whatever is a good song in a nightingale, it may not be the same that we think.
And that's a good theory of art, because a lot of great art comes out of that kind of... Rebecca West said that a lot of great art is people who are out of sync with the rest of the community justifying themselves. And she was talking about Vita Sackville-West's great garden at Sissinghurst because of her homosexuality, in a sense, sidelining her. And it looks as if a lot of art comes from that, an inner dissonance, a discord between you and the powers out there, and you somehow explore it and flourish it. So I like the idea of the wee weedy bird actually producing this great Mozartian noise, but not getting a mate, not getting it on.
Richard, one of the we can stay on a little music riff for a while. I'm a huge fan of Il Sistema when it first started in Venezuela, and you've become the big honcho for it in Sistema Scotland. Tell us a bit about that, and if you can see in what you're doing any relation between that natural spring of music from children and what one would call the music of, well, the great American biologist Lewis Thomas once called the music of this sphere.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know about this amazing thing that's now become an international movement, it's kind of gone viral in the world. It was started by a Venezuelan, Antonio Abreu, who's a polymath. He's an oil economist. He was a member of the House of Deputies in Caracas. He's a composer. He's a conductor. And about 37 years ago, he decided that one way to improve the lives of children in the ghettos and barrios of Venezuela was to build them into orchestras. He went completely against the classical European educational paradigm. In this country, I've got a granddaughter, lives in London, learning the violin. And what happens in this country is you plug away at the violin for 3 or 4 years, you get into a youth orchestra, and so on. He gets children into the orchestra virtually after the umbilical cord is cut, because he doesn't want them ever to remember a time when they didn't play an instrument. And he started the movement that they called El Sistema, the system, in a garage in a back street in Caracas about 37 years ago. And it stayed below the radar of the classical musical world until about 10, 12 years ago, when the rest of the world started realizing that they were producing outstanding musicians, world-class musicians, a great youth orchestra, the Simon Bolivar, brilliant conductors like Gustavo Dudamel. And by that time, in a country that didn't have much at all, they had over 150 local orchestras. And when I became chair of the Scottish Arts Council in 2005, an English journalist asked me, because I had to do a lot of interviews with cultural correspondents from newspapers, one cultural correspondent of an English newspaper dared to say to me, "Isn't a Scottish Arts Council an oxymoron?" Yeah, he got out alive, but only just. She said to me, "Have you heard about this?" And I did a little bit of research. And one of the things that I've had a kind of burden in my heart about for a long, long time is the fact that Scotland's a very unequal country, as is England. And the sort of various industrial revolutions that have gone through our country have left areas of complete dereliction, where people die younger, they have very diseased lives, they smoke and drug themselves. There's no juice in their lives, there's no joy, there's no play, and they die younger than everyone else. And their children partake of that. And governments have never been entirely cynical about it. They've had lots of little quick fixes. They've occasionally managed to rescue an individual. But nothing big and deep and organic enough seems to have touched these distressed communities. And when I heard about this, I thought maybe this will do it, because it's deep and slow. Becoming a great musician, working in an orchestra is slow and disciplined. I went over to see it, and I was blown away by what I saw. And the secret of the movement is intensity and immersion. The children in Venezuela go to these orchestras when school gets out, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they spend hours there. And what's happened is that the reality of the music and the orchestra and the community that builds it becomes stronger and more defining than the social reality that's killing them outside. So you've got that kind of redemption thing happening. And I wondered if this would work in Scotland. And we came back, I went over there to see it, took a BBC cameraman with me, and we were all blown away, and came back and founded Sistema Scotland. Raised a bit of money, went to Stirling Council, because they have a notorious deprived scheme in Stirling called Raploch. It's been deprived for many, many years, and they were doing one of these regeneration projects that we've seen all over Britain for the last 30, 40 years. They'll go in and they'll try to turn around a deprived community by doing up the houses, doing up the roads, putting in better schools, but no internal regeneration, nothing that touches the inner and the spiritual lives of the people. I went to Stirling Council and said, "You're doing this, a lot of European money is going into it. In 10 years, you'll probably be back where you started. Would you let us come in and try this mad experiment of making this a musical community?" They'd built a campus with 3 schools in it, a Catholic school, state school, special needs school. And they took a punt on us. They didn't cost them anything, because I said we'd raise the funds and try it for 5 years. The cynic said it would never work. Scotland's different. Scottish children are different from South American children. And anyway, bagpipes would do it, that kind of thing. But we persisted, and we recruited some amazing young musicians. And it's transformed that community in 5 years. I didn't expect that. Some of you may have watched the Olympic concert in June last year from a wet field in Raploch. the Simon Bolivar Orchestra came to Raploch and played alongside our kids, conducted by Gustavo Dudamel. And at the end of the concert, Maestro Abreu invited them to Caracas, and we're taking 60 kids from Raploch to Caracas in January. What it does is embedding children in an orchestra, and they don't audition, they all get in. All children are artists. And some of them are highly skilled. We've already discovered children in Raploch who are uniquely gifted. We've already got 10 children into the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland from this deprived housing scheme. We've got 12 children into the National Youth Choir of Scotland from a scheme that produced nothing but pain. And we've now got an adult orchestra. When we went into Raploch, we asked the children, because we prepared the way. We didn't want to land on them the way stuff always lands in these communities. They're done unto rather than done alongside. And when we went in, our musicians played at the bingo, they played in street corners, they knew something was happening. It was like that song in West Side Story, I got a feeling there's a miracle, you're gonna come true, coming to me. We built up that sense of something coming, there was something big coming. And when we spoke to the children, we said, what would you like the orchestra to be called? And they said, Big Noise. And so the Big Noise Orchestra, we've now got 80% of the children in this community who are musicians. If you visit Raploch, you'll see kids trudging along with double basses. Tell you a wee story that our wonderful young executive officer loves to tell about. She saw 3 wee kids. We've been opened about 18 months. And 3 wee boys were following their mothers past our headquarters. They gave us an old hairdressing salon, which we painted purple and put the kind of Big Noise logo on the top. And 3 wee boys were following their mother, and we'd been there about a year. And one wee boy, and the mothers were heads down, trudging. And one wee boy was saying to another wee boy, no, a viola's that size. Kids in Raploch debating about the size of music. We started with string orchestras, and after 3 years, moved into a complete brought in Winwood brass and percussion. That community's changed. There are still heartbreaking stories because a lot of the children lead very disturbed and painful lives, and it breaks the heart of our musicians. But it's already turned round. We've got a baby orchestra called Baby Noise because we go into the nursery school. Babies are natural percussionists. You don't actually have to train them. They just, they get into it immediately. The special needs school is part of it too. We teach special needs children to read color notes, a system invented in Finland because they can't read ordinary notation. I can go on about this all night. We proved that it worked, and the government finally recognized it, and they've given us enough money to keep Raploch going. And we opened again a second center in Govan Hill, which is an area just down the road from my old parish in Gorbals, which has 50 different languages. There's a large Romani population. And the schools invited us in because they said, we need something to unify this community. And the orchestra will unify it. And we've already got hundreds of children. We only opened in the summer. And we're going to sow these all over Scotland. We're going to change Scotland through orchestral music. Aberdeen's chasing us, Stranraer, a derelict town, is chasing us. And there's something brilliantly counterintuitive about it. Abreu wants to change the world through music. He thinks there's something about music that's transcendently transformational. And it is. And that's Systema Scotland. You've got a version of it in England called In Harmony. And it operates, I think there's an orchestra in Lambeth. There's one in Liverpool I'm going to visit in March. It's not quite as gritty as the Scottish version because civil servants got involved too early. We've kept politicians and civil servants right out of it. But it is doing great work. And the fact is that there is something about being in an orchestra that can include almost the complete community because you can have musical geniuses and people who don't do it very well, and they're all very supportive of it. And I mean, I'm an old man now, but when I'm dead and buried in 50 years' time, I think Scotland will be a different and a better country because of music. bird song.
I think it's true that there isn't a single society of humans on the planet that doesn't have music. And what I've read of ethnomusicology, because I'm very, very interested in the relationship between things like birdsong, natural sound, and human sound, has a very interesting theory about the origins of human music. Your baby being a natural drummer is part of it. And they've postulated that humans went through a stage, probably in the Paleolithic, when they were using a kind of universal sonic communication system, which they rather barbarously called Musi language. And they reconstruct this thinking of the kind of way that all mothers talk to all children. Very simplified cooings and drummings, and a great deal of body language which is integrated with the sounds. And it is a fact that that kind of mother-child communication is completely transcultural.
Yes.
Any mother with any child from any part of the globe can communicate with each other using that. And the anthropologists, ethnomusicologists, suggest that from this common pool, which is very close to the kind of dancing and rhythmic utterances of many other creatures, humans developed music and language in two quite different operations, recognizing that they were for different purposes. The verbal language was intense, information located, designed to communicate urgent facts. You know, a saber-toothed tiger is imminent. The music was much more imaginative, probably spiritual in terms of early religious beliefs, designed not for sharp communications, but for inclusive communications to bind together the community. Exactly what's happening in Il Sistema. It's incredible to me to think that that may have been how music was working 20, 30,000 years ago in human societies.
Do you think it would have been better if we just stuck to the music and didn't have the language? Because the language, John Gray
might have
thinks
stopped us having a lot of wars.
John Gray thinks the invention of language is the fall of humanity.
Yeah, I know.
You don't buy that?
No, I don't. I don't buy it
because it gave us poetry.
It's also a way back. You know, the decent use of language is a way back to a contact with each other and the world. But the fascinating thing is that you could extend this idea way back down the natural chain of evolution. Because every single organism on the planet does music as well. Not in the sense that birdsong is instantly recognizable as a kind of cousin to our music, but rhythm in terms of their pulses of life and the ways they organize their lives is absolutely universal. Down to the amoeba, which pulses through its life in its movements and its digestive system, up to the whale. There are people who think that whales are their own best music critics. And it's certainly true that the sound of a humpback whale can circumnavigate the globe. And Lewis Thomas, who is my hero as a biologist, the most wonderful essayist of the last 100 years, suggests the idea of whales waiting for their songs to come round to them.
Really?
Wondering, could I improve on that little coda next year? And he also conjures up. He's a wonderful man. If any of you have not read him, his book, The Lies of a Cell, will change your life. It's one of the 2 books I will say has changed my life. He's fond of conjuring up great imaginative possibilities, and one of them is what it would be like if we could hear the music of all the other creatures simultaneously. The sound of the timpani of gorillas' breasts, of certain underwater creatures, bivalves snapping their shells together. The notion of rhythm, unconsciously or not, I don't think it matters, is absolutely intrinsic to life and also actually to inorganic matter, because you find rhythms inside the atom, the kind of frequencies that certain subatomic particles radiate at. It seems to be one of the organizing principles of the universe. And just as Newton's 3rd law of thermodynamics, someone will correct me, says that all matter is essentially, and all energy is essentially running down by the overbearing forces of gravity especially. The evolution of life especially takes energy in exactly the opposite direction. Its particular forms may have been conjured up by this wonderful business of natural selection. But underneath all that, there does appear to be a kind of patterning in the universe. I'm not being mystical here, but the necessity for things to beat in rhythm, to be in some kind of rhythmic harmony, seems to run like a constant thread, not just through the inorganic matter of the universe, but the living things as well. And of course, life goes in the totally opposite direction to the entropy of the world, to the running down of the world. Just as the solar system and the whole universe will eventually end up perhaps as a cinder, living things progressively become more and more intricate, and some kind of musical energy is part of that process.
You kind of avoided the word mysticism there, and I'm wondering why, whether the word kind of scares you a wee bit because it resonates with a lot of heavy baggage. But there is something extraordinary about this stuff that you're describing, the fact that apparently inert matter, I mean, unless you think that there was some kind of creativity in it from the beginning, has produced agency, self-conscious agency, beauty, music, rhythm, altruism, pity, compassion. I don't want to jump into a kind of supernatural explanation of that, but it's what keeps me in awe. And what I don't want any more than I want too dominant and certain a supernatural explanation, I don't either want the reductionism that's so prevalent in our society at the moment that purges the mysticism out of it. It can be a kind of immanent mysticism, can't it?
Yes. I suppose my problem is that I find the unmystical much more mystical than real mysticism, if you see what I mean. Somebody, assuming because of the way that I write that I was spiritual, asked me what my kind of spirituality consisted of. I've never agreed to be nailed by this word. I'm not entirely sure I know what it means. And I said, being rather mischievous on the spur of the moment, it was Andrew Motion who was interviewing me actually, so that will perhaps tell you why I was mischievous. I said I was a transcendental materialist.
Yes.
That is, that the real stuff of the universe blew my head away. I didn't need anything more. It was just the astonishment of the way things work. And to me, it is infinitely more beautiful, astonishing, that the universe of life especially cobbled itself together by this amazing business of natural selection, of little mutations suddenly appearing, of one being chosen over another, that out of that process, happening trillions and trillions and trillions of times every year, the astonishing universe of life that we live in should have appeared. You know, how much duller would it be if somebody was actually piecing all those things together with a plan, as if it was an orchestral score?
It's called a design, Richard.
Yes, I know it's a design. I don't want to get that. I mean, the fact that I mean, you used the word jazz before. I mean, I think that evolution has a lot of affinities with the process of jazz. That is that an idea is thought of. You know, let's 4 legs appear. What can we do with that? You know, grow claws. Yeah, I could try that. Pads, cloven hooves. Suspicious there. But it's as if, you know, you had this theme and it's run with until it runs out. And the idea, I think, that some people who don't properly understand evolution have is that everything in nature has a use, is wrong. The only things that aren't there are things which are actually contrary to life. Nature is a great, extravagant waster of energy. It speckles the world. Annie Dillard, the great American nature writer in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, talks about the tangled fringes of life. They don't have to be there. Why are there teeth on the edges of leaves? And at one point she said, wouldn't it have been easier for the creator just to have created one big green blob? And the fact is that, for me, being personal, that there is just one big mystery, and that is, why is there anything?
Yeah.
Once there was something, the rest was almost inevitable.
But the fact that there's something and not nothing is itself itchy.
Yes, I know that is itchy, but knowing that it cannot be other than itchy, it's one thing I choose not to
let me
scratch.
take you to the end. One of the things I love about you is that you're sad and melancholy because there's a lot of pain and loss. One of the things I've been meditating on recently, I won't be around when it happens, but the heat death of our own wee blue planet. Gradually, life will disappear, and all the symphonies, all the good works, all the great writing, all the compassion, all the cathedrals, all the glory that we created will have been as nothing and will have disappeared. And now the fact that it was at all is its own meaning, but it kind of makes you feel poignant, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I love the ending of your Alexandria book, where you say, contemplating your own death, saying, "Well, that's it." Well, almost certainly.
Yes.
And I think that's absolutely delicious ending.
Yeah.
I once, when I was a student, tried to write a short story. I did a bit of fiction in those days. About what Bertrand Russell would say if he woke up after dying to find that there was an afterlife.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it. I honestly believe the old guy would be speechless, and I did not think there could be words which could express that unlikelihood.
Alfred Ayer, on the other hand, did have that experience, and it kind of shook him for a few minutes. You know, the great logical positivist, he had an, I don't know whether he technically did die, but it kind of shook him a bit. I don't know whether he saw the white light and stuff that there's a whole, I get sent lots of books by these people trying to reclaim me, and they all, you know, a lot of them are about near-death experiences and the white light at the end of the tunnel. I'm prepared to be surprised. It's just all the prospectuses I've read in the afterlife don't attract me in the least. But I'm quite enjoying this one, and I'm still held in a kind of transcendental edge by the fact that the being of being at all. I mean, Wittgenstein said that if every possible scientific question has been answered, the problem still remains. Now, you can't get off it. A friend of mine who died recently, I said to him, why is there something and not just nothing, Norman? And he said, the just is, Richard, get used to it. But I mean,
get over it, yes.
But you can't get used to not asking the question. At least I can't.
No.
Because I'm a sick kind of person. William James, Henry James, his brother, the great pragmatist philosopher, divided humanity into healthy souls and sick souls. And the healthy souls just accepted life. The sick souls asked all these questions, you know. Why is there something and not just nothing? And I guess I'm still doing that, still sick. But I find the sick people quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Come back down to earth, shall we, for a little while, and some questions which possibly can be answered. Mm-hmm. I'm intrigued about, you know, your exit from allowing a God figure, or religion rather, to dictate morality, and, you know, much more agreeably think that it should be something which should be agreed, debated, worked out, experienced, whatever it is, by humans themselves. And I'm wondering whether you think there are, disregarding religious ones, any kind of codifying externals, outsides, as you call them in your book, which one can turn to. Because let me throw the fact that I think that there are some in ecosystems. I think that though animals are not moral creatures in the sense that philosophers use the word moral creatures, that is, they don't make decisions about right and wrong. The way that evolution has produced ecosystems, that is, communities of animals and organisms and plants that interact with each other, they do have rules, and they appear to be moral rules because they support the health of the community. Some of these are barbaric by our standards, but a lot aren't. And they include the fact that you cannot be a bully in an ecosystem. It leads instantly to your elimination. There is no waste in natural ecosystems. By and large, creatures are tremendously good parents of their own children. They're not very nice to the children of other lineages, but okay, no system is perfect. And I'm wondering, I'm just offering some of these thoughts that, of the idea that morality may be something as a code of natural behavior which precedes the fine-tuning which human beings have given it, because it was necessary to have these rules for things to live.
But we've lost it. I mean, which is why, and it's, you can either talk about the fall or the step up, but the fact that we've got these big brains and this self-consciousness that goes with it, the fact that we're an object of interest to ourselves, the fact that we get out of balance and disorder, because unlike the kind of balance that you're talking about, we've lost that. We're the most disordered creatures on the planet, the most dangerous animal on the planet. Theologians, the myth for that is the doctrine of the fall, which philosophers like John Gray actually believe in, because he thinks that we are very dangerous animals, and our intellect makes us doubly dangerous, because we create these great mythic systems, both political and religious, and they take their revenge on us and they dominate us. And so we don't respond to the kind of stuff that you're talking about, because we've somehow leapt out of that. And that's why moral systems are so problematic for the human creature, and why, I suppose, God got kind of invented as a big authority with a big stick. We invented that authority with a big stick in order to keep us under control. And one of the difficulties, I suppose, with creating, I wrote a book called Godless Morality, because it seemed to me that every time we associate God with our moral systems, we have to edit God out of them, because God hates gays, God oppresses women, God puts us in charge of the planet and tells us to trample all the other creatures, and we morally evolve out of that, so we're constantly editing God out of it. So I think that we really do have to admit that we're children alone. We've no longer got a father who can dictate a moral system to us. But it's actually quite a tragic situation to be in. I think when Nietzsche said God was dead, he was mourning the fact that we're now parentless and without guidance except our own kind of love and kindness for each other. And I guess you can probably still construct a few moral rules that most communities would want to try and live with, probably distilled into the golden rule: don't do unto others what you wouldn't have them do unto you. I like the stuff that Adam Phillips writes about the word kind coming from the word kindred. We are of all of one kind, and we should have that kind of reciprocity that the other creatures seem to have and that we've lost. But I do worry that our big brains and the systems we've created are dominating that fragility. And we could be in for some very, very bad stuff. A lot of bad stuff's already happening to us.
It's very interesting that do unto others as you would have done to yourself. Peter Medawar, the great biologist, worked mathematically to try and find a stable model of competition between animals. And that was the only one which worked. There was, I can't remember the exact system, but there was the eagle and the mouse, and there was one in between. The idea was that you could have a system of competition between creatures which was based on bullying. That collapses because the bully runs out of prey. You can have a system of mice which gives in on every pressure. That collapses as well because the mice vanish as well for that reason. There was one level in between these which worked on the principle of do exactly to your competitor or the person you live with that they do to you, but you don't do it first. And he modeled this mathematically for various animal communities, and it was the only one that was stable, that didn't fly apart from overconsumption or the decrease of diversity of species. So it's very interesting.
You put me onto another lovely book about that, Joseph Meeker's The Comedy of Survival,
yes.
in which he talks about the comic way of animals versus the tragic way of the human animal. That we will fight to the death, they won't. They will ritualize their aggression on a bush, but we fight to the death. We're fighting to the death in Syria. We're fighting. We've been plunging ourselves into war, and he calls for us to look at the animals and learn from them. And John Gray's latest book, The Silence of Animals, trying to do the same thing. Stop looking at us. We are cursed in many ways. And if you look out there now, it's not going to catch on. The current Westminster government's not going to go there, but it's there's a lot to be said for it, isn't there? Consider the lilies and the wee beasties underneath them. Yeah, sorry.
Should we have some audience, do you think?
Questions? Yeah.
You talked about systems and moral systems and il sistema. Do you think that il sistema is a viable moral system?
A viable moral system? Yes, because it's intuitively, intrinsically cooperative. They all work together. They accept difference. They're surrounded. To be surrounded by the music that you're making in an orchestra is an extraordinary kind of unifying experience. And I'm not a musician myself, so I'm a bit of a fraud talking about this. But our musicians tell me in Hebreo, and I watch it happening, that there is something kind of unifying about making music together. You could probably get it with a number of other things. I think dancing together can be unifying. But I think that maybe what you're coming at is there's some kind of implicit mystical ecology in an orchestra. And it is the orchestra. And in Venezuela, they have enormous bands. Very, very, they've hundreds. I don't know how many of you have watched the Simon Bolivar, but the passion with which they play and the kind of, the way they all love when others get on, as it were, further than they do. That's the thing that most surprised me about watching it, because it both respects the fact that we are in many ways unequal in our giftedness, but it is possible to celebrate that and not be envious of it. And envy is one of those modern capitalist vices that I think this kind of system can erode.
So do you think in El Sistema that the kind of sense of collaboration that it fosters eclipses competition that might otherwise be there?
The word competition is not entirely inappropriate because we do stream. We have orchestras of the musicians who are better than others, but there doesn't seem to be any of the kind of resentment of that you get in other kinds of discourse about that. And they do all come together in the big symphony orchestra, but the kids that are going to Caracas are the best 60 out of the kind of 400 or 500 kids that we have. And there's no grudging of that. The whole community is getting behind it to raise money. They're having raffles and all that kind of thing to help pay for it because it's quite expensive. And I think that the orchestra, but of course the orchestra also reflects ordinary human weakness. I once gave a talk to some European orchestral administrators, and they were telling me that there was an enormous problem of alcoholism in a lot of classic European orchestras. So I don't want to overdo this, but the fact is that it's a cooperative enterprise that creates beauty. And it's the beauty that comes out of it, that what the children are doing is creating something that comes out of them that is in its own right transcendent and transforming. And the silence at the end of a great performance, the kind of hush that kind of diminishes us and exalts that, all of that is transforming for them. Apart from anything else, it teaches them hard work and discipline, and those are transferable skills. They get better at everything.
Just as a continuation of the El Sistema question, how do you deal with exclusion? Do you have to exclude ever? How do you deal with the inclusion-exclusion in a community like that?
We don't ever get rid of a child. We may have to take a child out of the rehearsals, the work, because he or she is making it impossible. But we never put them out completely. They will get one-to-one, they will get other things to do. The commitment we made is that we would never desert these children, no matter what they did, because they're so used to desertion. There's one reason why when we opened in Raploch, we said, no matter whether we don't get any money from government, we're going to keep this going because we've invested in these lives. These children trust us. We're never walking away. So we've had experiences of children who've had to go out of the orchestra, but they're still, as it were, in the system. And some of them come back in. There are some children you discover that aren't maybe going to continue to make music, but you discover they have an aptitude for making musical instruments. One of the things, if we can get this really going in a big way in Britain, it could help. We now employ 50 people in Sistema Scotland. We've got one boy already who has an aptitude for repairing musical instruments. We could restore British industry by making musical instruments. What could be more beautiful than that? They do it, and already in Venezuela, they repair musical instruments. At the moment, we are buying hundreds of them. We've got a good deal. But one day, we're going to make our own instruments. And we're beginning to look at that. We're beginning to look at a business plan where we can do that. So I don't want to be kind of Pollyannish, but there doesn't seem to be a downside to this at all. Which is why, you'd think even politicians would get it. And a statistic I give to when they say, well, it's quite expensive because it costs maybe about £1,500 a year per child. You can spend £200,000 a year to keep a child in secure accommodation. You pour treasure into destroying the lives of children, maintaining a system that doesn't work. The youth justice system is heartbreakingly awful. And if we could get even 6 kids that didn't get into that system, we could transform a whole community with that. And politicians are listening because the bottom line is important to them. The way we do these deprived communities at the moment is expensive. It costs millions to keep people miserable. It would cost tens of thousands to make them happy. QED.
Thank you.
You both expressed gently skeptical views towards religion and spirituality. Perhaps Richard may be more skeptical. I've been doing some thinking recently about the voices of anti-religion. Maybe Richard Dawkins is a more gentle one, and there are some more aggressive ones. Mm-hmm. And I find that a little bit disturbing. I'm not particularly religious, but I see a lot of benefit in religion, including creating communities. Mm-hmm. And it's done some bad things, but it does. Obviously, there are lots of good things. I'd be curious about reactions from both of you to that.
Yeah. It's bullying, isn't it? It's the kind of thing that there's a lot of. I mean, I still think of myself as a religious person, a kind of immanent type of religion. I still go to church. I still love the stories, the music, the good works that get done. But I think that one of the interesting things that's happening in the atheist church in Britain at the moment is the new atheists like Richard, John Gray, Alain de Botton, Brian Appleyard, are very affirming about much in religion. Alain de Botton wrote a book called Religion for Atheists. There's Brian there, sorry. So there is a sense in which there is much in religion that you can affirm, and you don't have to be bullyingly. I mean, Richard Dawkins, whom I like as well, but a lot of these guys want it extirpated completely. I don't mind what people believe, as long as it doesn't make them cruel. And I think religion can, in fact, make people cruel. It can also make people kind. But I think atheism can make people cruel as well. Brian, hello.
No, I would stick up for Richard Dawkins. I mean, the one or two people making a strong case against religion set that against, thousands of years of oppression, of really corporate bullying by the religions of the world. He's fighting a lonely corner there, and if it came to a showdown, I'd be there with Richard Dawkins with both my fists, I tell you.
Yep.
And I'm a pacifist.
Brian,
I'm certainly not a new atheist.
a new atheist, I thought.
No, absolutely not.
Even a new atheist, yeah.
No. I'm more on your side than Richard Dawkins, certainly, and I describe myself as a militant agnostic. But I think our mutual friend John Gray is confusing the issue here, because John Gray is something else. And I'm very sympathetic to your position, which is, I think religion is, broadly speaking, a good thing, irrespective of its material truth or otherwise. And I'm very moved by what you said about music. I'm not asking a question here, I'm just responding to what you just said. So,
I took your name in vain, Brian, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think you're both cycling around a sort of issue which is fundamental, and which to some extent is brought on by these new atheists. Because since 9/11, which was, I think, their real inspiration, that and book sales, I think, well, it was obviously book sales, and you're cycling around an issue which has been sharpened by those people by saying that, this is all terrible, this is a dreadful conspiracy that oppresses people and so on, which to me is patently nonsense, and to be honest, I think really is driven by book sales. And I think what you're talking about, what you two are cycling around, is a response to that, which does not hinge upon the supernatural. I sympathize with that, but I think you're both sort of not quite. I mean, you don't have to say this is supernatural, this is not supernatural, because the word supernatural in itself is highly ambiguous, and the word natural is highly ambiguous. I am a great admirer of you both, and I think what you said was inspiring and wonderful. But I think you're kind of not saying it, which is that the present, I strongly recommend you both read a book by Thomas Nagel called Mind and Cosmos, which is a masterpiece, and it's very short. Everybody hates it. Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, they all got mad about it, and it's a masterpiece. And it just says it's possible that our present view of the world is simply wrong. And Nagel is no theist, he's an atheist. And that, it seems to me, is what is important, is we're dealing with a contemporary superstition here. And that's what you two are talking about.
Because he brings teleology back in, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And
so there may be a meaning.
Yeah, and he's just saying that that the universe may be constructed. I mean, Thomas Nagel is being treated as a pariah at the moment for this sake.
I know.
And in fact, he's
An
not.
An Oxford philosopher reviewing his book said if philosophers had an index, this book would be on it. Revisiting that kind of censoring
actually,
books.
as our mutual friend John Gray has said, the one institution capable of censorship in our time is science.
Yes.
I won't go on, sorry.
There's one at the back, just there. Yes, thanks, Stuart.
I'd like to press Richard Mabey slightly on a question. At the beginning of the conversation, I think Richard Holloway said, raised the question, why is it that we find it so hard, or many of us find it so hard to grant subjectivity and agency to non-human species, which wasn't answered. So I'd like to sort of slightly press you, Richard, maybe, on the possibility that that difficulty that institutions have, that anthropocentrism and species chauvinism, is to an unfortunate extent wound up in the science that you admire.
Sorry, what was the last?
It's wound up, that chauvinism is wound up in science, modern science, and scientific method to an unfortunate extent, which leaves you, I think, in an odd position, because you want to defend science, but you want to oppose anthropocentrism. But most scientists probably are reluctant to grant that agency and that subjectivity.
Quite sure I entirely follow what you're getting at, but anthropocentrism is a very interesting thing. I mean, obviously, if you're being philosophically precise, we are unable to look at anything except in an anthropocentric way because we are anthropocentric. The discipline of being a living being, not just a human being, but of actually occupying a place on the planet in which there are trillions of individuals of 30 million species, seems to me that it is incumbent upon us to go as far as we can beyond anthropocentrism. That is, to work at the way of granting agency to creatures and organisms that are not just our neighbors, but actually our relatives. If one wanted to do a silly piece of maths to persuade somebody who still doesn't believe that we're descended from earlier beings, it is actually possible to quantify the degree of first cousin several times removed between us and an amoeba. It's not actually that many. I mean, it's not even astronomical. And if the plea to fascination doesn't work with people, it does with me. The idea that I'm living with these extraordinary products of the wild energy of evolution is pretty much okay for me. And I find now that it is second nature for me to regard them as neighbors. And if I use the first person plural, I realize that I'm very often in ordinary conversation, and it perplexes a lot of people. I'm talking about not just the human species, but quite a lot of other species. But I think that if that argument doesn't get to people, if they simply do not see it, if they are blind to the astonishment of the elephant or the ant, then the plea to be kind to your relatives, I hope, might work. But if I get your meaning right, we're stuck with anthropocentrism.
But Richard, I think his question was really, why on the whole are scientists not doing that?
I think that with respect, you will find that there's been quite a sea change now in science. I know more about botany than any other science. I don't know much about any science, but I probably know a bit of botany. And there's been the emergence in the last 5 years of what seems to be a new idea called plant thinking. And it's kind of, it's extremely post-structuralist, taken very seriously in some American universities, and reads like utter nonsense. But at the heart of it, there is a core of trying to extend this notion of the agency of a living creature to things that are beyond our empathy. It's easy to be empathetic with a cat or a lion or even a whale. To be empathetic with a dandelion makes you sound slightly balmy. So you,
Prince Charles does it.
We need ways of actually talking about that transaction between ourselves, that relationship, that aren't nonsensical, that will live up to philosophical scrutiny and also to ecological ethics. And I'm very pleased that despite some of the crazy writing that's coming out of this school in the States at the moment, it is actually happening. But the lovely thing is that it's an old idea. If you go back to the French symbolist poet Maurice Maeterlinck, who wrote a delicious book called The Intelligence of Flowers, you'll find it there. If you go back to Coleridge in his notebooks, it is absolutely there as well. The recognition of the essential, active, living identity of each creature. And it's to try and, as I say, find a cogent way of talking about that, even though we are Anthropocenes, that I think is the business. Certainly, I think I regard that as the business of nature writing, for want of a better justification.
Well, that's a marvelous answer. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Nabokov writes about butterflies and moths and the mimicry they can achieve in hiding from predators. And he thinks that that proves that nature is an artist in its own way. But it's obviously not a personal intelligence, it's like a species intelligence. And I wondered if you found that persuasive and how you might account for that.
Can you just paraphrase from?
Yeah, I mean, it's to do with, as I understand it, Nabokov's assertion that butterflies hide from predators through mimicry.
Yes, but
And
mimicry far in excess of what they need to use. Like it's much better than it needs to be to avoid predators.
So it for you kind of merges into artistry or unnecessary kind of artifice.
For him, he says that that's how to
Do you
account
buy
for
that?
it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they overdo it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's a lot of the products of evolution which give the beneficiaries of that evolution an advantage in certain environmental situations in that they look like something else and so perhaps are invisible to predators. But if you take an area where some work has been done by enthusiastic entomologists on this line, moths. If you look at the codifying names of the several thousand moths that frequent the British Isles, you will find things like the Hebrew character as one of the names. And this refers to a moth which is identified by a minute little Hebrew character on both sides of the wings. It's no longer than a millimeter. And there is also there's a modified Hebrew character moth as well, which has a slightly abbreviated white comma as well. Now, these I would maintain are arbitrary extravagances which nature has just thrown up. They have no meaning other than the fact that evolution is promiscuous. It loves invention. It loves grace notes. Another thing that you could bring in as an analogy with music is the fact that evolution loves throwing in these little flourishes. Sometimes they come in useful, sometimes not, but they're there. It's all overdone in nature. And hardline Darwinists will refute this until it's shown that their theories simply don't work anymore, that every little reticulation on an elm leaf is there for a purpose. It ain't. Yeah. It is just there. Yeah. And that is one of the wonders of nature, this profligate expenditure of energy that we find beautiful, and perhaps other creatures find beautiful in their own way as well. Michael Pollan, wonderfully literate American writer, now writing largely on food, wrote a book called The Botany of Desire, where he put forward a very plausible theory for the aesthetic sense of insects in the way that they related to the flowers which provided them nectar. Something that Ruskin, of course, would have abominated. He even disapproved of photosynthesis because he said it made plants resemble gasometers. His belief was that the plant existed purely to produce flowers for the delectation of the human observer and the glory of God. And the fact that the plant itself might have an agenda, and that flowers were simply one part of this, and which involved a very interesting erotic relationship with insects. He wouldn't even think about it. It was disgusting. He thought it was an obscenity. When he read Darwin's account of the fertilization of orchids by insects, he actually called it obscene. I think that this will be a spin-off of this new, intensely philosophical debate into plant thinking. Are there aesthetics in the world out there which are transacted between other creatures and other organisms? Is there even an aesthetic which transcends all creatures altogether, which is determined by the laws of physics? Lots to still think about.
There's the American poet Robinson Jeffers wrote a poem about this, about the extravagance of creation, and the fact that it's just promiscuously prodigal. And I like this notion that nature is playing around with the paint box and not just being programmed by some mad Darwinist with earphones on.
Well, on that
We're all free, and so's the planet. Isn't that interesting?
On that note, Richard, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for playing around so beautifully with your own paint boxes this evening. I think actually we've almost been doing these Longplayer Conversations for 10 years. And I think I'm right in saying this is the first one to explicitly talk about music as a paradigm and as a symbol, which are beautifully interwoven with everything else that you touched on. Thank you so much for a really stimulating conversation, and thank you all very much for coming. Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.